What is going on, Colts Nation? And welcome back to another episode of Bring the Juice. Your guys, Cody and Derek here, guys. Back for another episode. Don't worry, guys. Football season is almost back. We are getting closer and closer with each passing day. And so we thought, in lieu of football season getting closer, we wanted to talk about three positions that we believe are underrated, right? And so, Derek, how I kind of think underrated. There's a lot of positions that when you think of the Indianapolis Colts and their offseason, right, a lot happened at a lot of different positions. Some people are talking about a lot of these other positions a lot. And we feel like these three positions in particular are either not being talked about. And if they are being talked about, they're not really being given the proper credit that we feel like they deserve. So, you could say underappreciated or underrated, however you want to phrase it. But regardless, we have three positions that we think stand out. And I wanted to give just an honorable mention as well, because I don't feel like we talk about it enough, to just the special teams. I know that's not necessarily just a position, but a unit in general. The special teams unit is always on par for the Colts, always just absolutely fantastic. Just wanted to give a special shout out to them. But with the first position that we have here, Derek, it is the quarterback position. And this position has been under a microscope, as it is, in the NFL. The Colts did a lot this offseason to change the quarterback position, who was in there. Compared to last year to this year, it's completely different, right? Colts added two veteran quarterbacks in Nick Foles and Matt Ryan. Talk to me about why you believe, though, the quarterback position, it makes our list here.
Yeah, I mean, when you're looking at it, you've still seen a lot of fans, especially on social media, calling how they say that they don't really think Matt Ryan has a lot to really offer when it comes to being an NFL quarterback, and especially for the Colts for several years. I think a lot of people that really understand football and really have taken the time to understand the situation that Matt Ryan has been in over the last few years and to still put up relative numbers despite what he's going through. You look at it and you say, this is still a position that the Colts are going to have to look at long term, but in the short term solution of things, I think Matt Ryan is really a player that not a lot of people are giving credit where credit is due. And I think at this point, you have some people who are saying that we kind of are at the point where we pump him up so much to the point they're saying, let's just pump on the brakes now. I'm not as confident as I once was when the hire came out, because, we're hearing all these people saying, oh, the Colts can win 11, 12 games with this guy at quarterback. I even see so many people saying 13, 14 wins. I don't know how in the world that people think that the Colts are going to win 13, 14 games. Now, if they did, it would make me a very happy Colts fan, okay? But at the end of the day, I still don't think we're going to quite win 13, 14 games. It's pretty hard to do, even in the NFL nowadays. Kind of hard to do that. But I could still easily see 11, 12 wins if the Colts play their cards right. And, having that kind of quarterback in Matt Ryan and, hearing Kylan Granson talk about, Matt Ryan and somewhat of Nick Foles as well, being in the locker room, being on the field, those guys with that veteran experience is exactly what this team needs to be able to drive them forward and keep them going in the midst of a long season. Granson mentioned that when it gets tough towards the end of the season and you start getting complacent, having guys like Matt Ryan to constantly remind you that you can't stop is a great thing to have for this team. And I think that's a part of Matt Ryan that I think a lot of people are just forgetting. They always talk about the play, but they don't always talk about what the guy is like in the locker room and on the field at the end of the season when it matters. And I think that's what makes it more of an underrated or underappreciated value for the position, is because Matt Ryan's going to be able to keep you afloat a lot more than what Carson Wentz and some other quarterbacks before him were able to do.
Kind of in my experience, I don't really feel like it's been Colts fans so much that have underappreciated, undervalued Matt Ryan. I feel like it's been everybody else, right? It's been other fans who have looked at it and been, they've looked at just the surface, right? They looked at last year, they looked at his age, and they said Matt Ryan's washed up. He's not what he used to be. You even see it in the stats and all that stuff. And as I've said many times, and I'm sure you have as well, Derek, stats can be very misleading at times. While they are valuable, they can be very misleading at times. And so to get a quarterback like Matt Ryan, who still has a good couple of years at least left in him, just from that, yeah, like you mentioned, the things that he does obviously on the field, but also off the field, in the locker room, those things, those cannot be undervalued. And I think the Colts realize that, and Colts fans are realizing that. But still, we don't talk about, what an upgrade, honestly, Matt Ryan is going to be, not just on the field, but even off the field in the locker room. So I totally agree with you. Same goes with Nick Foles as well, just adding more veteran leadership in there, adding another guy that's been there, done that. That's why I always was okay with the move when the Colts signed him. I know a lot of people were like, just give the job to Sam Ellinger, but I was like, hey, I would rather have a guy, while he's maybe not as great, he's a backup for a reason. He gives you a little bit more confidence that, if he has to go lead the team, he can do so because he's done it before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Nick Foles being your backup and just being one of those guys in the backup role. I know everyone always gives crap to Nick Foles for, being a starter, but I mean, in retrospect, I mean, what he's widely renowned as is a career backup. And when he's in that role, and he specifically is requested to be in that role, to be the guy that comes in at a certain point to try and save the day, he has performed in that role very well. And that's why at this point, that's where he fits best, is not to rely to be the starter for 17 games, but maybe be that starter for 2 or 3 games down a key stretch that you need. You feel more confident in his ability to do that versus going all the way through a whole season.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's the first position we have, guys, the quarterback position. We have another position on the offense we want to talk about, and that is the wide receiver position. I mean, I feel like the wide receiver position has just been so scrutinized the last couple of years, and I think rightfully so in some ways. It is very much underachieved besides a few guys here and there, but I think a lot of people look at this wide receiver group and they honestly think it's one of the bottom wide receiver groups in the league. I think there's still a lot of people who do think that. I'm not there, Derek. I just think there's a lot of unprovenness right now with these young wide receivers, which is why I'm not opposed to bringing back a T.Y. Hilton, for a season. If that unprovenness turns out to be these guys just aren't ready. But I think it's still underappreciated, because when you look at the amount of talent that's on this wide receiver group, there's still a lot, right? You added a really talented wide receiver in the draft in Alec Pierce. You have a very talented wide receiver in Paris Campbell. I liked what Ashton Dulin did last year. And if he's there as your number 4 wide receiver, I think that's a great number 4 option. And then you have young guys who have shown some things. They haven't shown a lot yet, but they've shown flashes. So all that to say, I feel like wide receiver is very underrated, underappreciated. Could it use some tweaks? Potentially. We'll see. We'll see what happens to some of these young guys. But I think some people are maybe undervaluing or underappreciating the amount of talent that Chris Ballard has in this room, and the Colts do have in this room, because of kind of what we saw last year in certain ways. And some people think it was all the wide receivers, when in fact, I think it was a little bit of both, wide receiver and quarterback. What are your thoughts on the wide receivers?
Yeah, it's no doubt when you ask the majority of not just Colts fans, but fans of football in general, they don't have a very high opinion of this wide receiver room for Indianapolis. Michael Pittman's just now coming into the frame of everything. And obviously, people like to talk so much about numbers, and that's the problem. Is it's always numbers. And especially with, the way fantasy football goes into football nowadays, it misconstrues the way people look at certain players. And that's the problem with it, is it's always just about stats and not always about the productivity that you get from a multitude of different ways for that position. And, especially now with, like you said, Ballard trying to acquire talent. And that's the issue here, is we just have a lot of unprovenness in this position. And that's why people have this as such a low rated group. But you look at what Michael Pittman is able to do just last season, 88 receptions for 1,100 yards and 6 touchdowns. That's a good season for a guy like that. And you hope that he can continue to improve based on the quarterback that he has now. And you look at Alec Pierce, who we just drafted. You hope that everyone always kind of fell into the same idea of what he is that he's a vertical threat, and that's all he is. Like, nobody wants to look at the potential of a guy that's 6'3", 210 pounds, that can jump 40 inches and can run a 4.3 40 time. Like, there is just people that want to look at what the national media or a few people are saying and say that's the only thing this guy's good at because of what we saw in college. And we have to look beyond that. And obviously, Paris Campbell being injured, everyone's kind of writing him off. You hope that he can come back and provide you some more stuff. And, not to mention Naheem Hines is most likely going to be in the receiving game a lot more this year as well. As a running back, I get it, but like from the receiving game specifically, adding a Naheem Hines element to that is going to not only help Matt Ryan, but it's also going to help the wide receivers. You're going to have some of those linebackers that are now like wanting to keep up a little more, because now you have linebackers that are always looking at Naheem Hines, and you have corners that are maybe you get some of those corners that have aggressive tendencies that like to stay up because they see Naheem Hines coming out of the backfield and they're looking to try to pounce on that opportunity to hit him in the flat and drop him for a negative play. That allows some of these wide receivers who are running these short routes to get more open because that split second of hesitancy from corners is what Matt Ryan needs to be able to hit his receivers on those out routes and all those flats and other things like that. So what it provides you is this group has a lot of athletic ability. And I think it's a very underrated group because people are just not talking about it because they think it's just going to be another haphazard year where Matt Ryan's going to connect to Pittman for like 1,200 yards and it's probably going to give like a couple other guys like, 500 something yards because they just don't see it as going any higher. But I think that this group has a lot more to offer athletically than what people are willing to admit.
Yep. It's a position that's constantly wrote off, like you talked about. But I think there's some potential upside for some of these guys. And I'm excited to see, do some of these guys potentially break out this year. So, all right, that's the second position we have. Guys, we want to flip it over for the last position that we have on our list. Let's talk about the linebacker position because we know all the time about defensive line. We talk about it all the time. Everybody talks about it, with all the guys the Colts have on that line, DeForest Buckner, Yannick Ngakoue, Kwity Paye, Dio Adangbo, go on. The list goes on and on. You talk about corner with Stephon Gilmore, Isaiah Rodgers, Julian Blackman, Nick Cross, Rodney McLeod, all those guys, but we don't like talk about linebacker. It's a one position group, Derek, that really did not go through any major changes this offseason on that defense. You still have your two starters. You still have your key backups. The only guy you really lost was Matthew Adams, who was a special teams guy at best. You still do have, two quality backups, you feel like, in, Zaire Franklin and EJ Speed. So nobody talks about this linebacker room, but I think last year, Derek, it was one of the better units in the league, and quietly nobody talked about it,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was funny because PFF are actually the executives of the NFL were asked to rank every position and talk about the 10 best players at every position. And based off executives in the NFL, Darius Leonard was ranked number one, the best linebacker in the NFL based off of the executives of the NFL, the guys that get paid to watch and scout and understand this game said Darius Leonard is number one. And we continue to keep talking about him. Obviously, Darius Leonard, everyone knows the maniac, right? You always got to know where the maniac is because he's a turnover waiting to happen, right? But then we don't always talk about this backup group. And even amongst Colts fans, after what we saw last season, are still saying this group is just not up to par. And I just still don't understand it. Okereke just led the team in tackles last year. And we're talking about him like as if he's not even like he's not anything. Like he's not really that good. Like he led the team in tackles. Like that has been a Darius Leonard thing all his early career. And Okereke just did that for him. Like, if that doesn't prove to you where this linebacker core is for Indianapolis right off the bat, I don't know what to tell you. And then the two backups that we have right behind them, Zaire Franklin and EJ Speed, they had to go to Arizona and had to play against one of the most electrifying quarterbacks in the NFL in Kyler Murray. You had to find a way to contain him while also holding that Arizona offense down. And they did it by themselves. They did it with no help. Like that defense was stripped of that game. Okay. Obviously, they didn't have DeAndre Hopkins, their best weapon, but that has nothing to do with the linebackers. They went out there and they had to be leaders. They had to go out there and lead the defense to be able to slow down Kyler Murray. And besides one big play by Kyler Murray in the second quarter, he did nothing the rest of the game. We were able to win that game because our defense was able to hold them to only 13 points. So like that's an amazing accomplishment. And it's one that keeps getting overlooked. I don't understand why it keeps getting overlooked. EJ Speed and Zaire Franklin, who we said in that game, I think you and I had more confidence than most people in their ability to play the game that week. I think most people, even now, are still trying to write it off as if it was nothing. You can't overlook something like that. You really can't. I really think that this backup unit for the Colts is just as capable of doing it as some other units in the NFL. I really think they do. They need more time. They need more experience. And with this cover three defense that they're running, they might have to do more 3 linebacker sets. So we might see more of Zaire Franklin. We might see more of EJ Speed, just depending on the kind of defense they're running. But I mean, outside of Darius Leonard, for some reason, even in his own fan base, it keeps getting talked about like it's average at best. Like, I really think it's better than that. Okereke is a really good linebacker. Is he elite yet? No, of course he's not. But I still think he's a good to really good linebacker when he can be. And these backups, I think Zaire and EJ Speed are definitely formidable backups.
Mm-hmm. I think it speaks volumes to the Colts' lack of attention to this group, right? As much as fans want to clamor and say that, oh, this group was terrible last year, the backups were terrible last year, or whatever it is, the Colts felt confident in these guys. It was very obvious that they felt confident in these guys because, like I mentioned, they did not add a single impact notable player at their linebacker position. They added a few potential undrafted free agents, but other than that, they didn't touch it, Derek. The only position they did not touch. So I think I'm going to go ahead and trust the guys that are in charge and the coaches, what the coaches said, and what the GM saw and what everybody saw, what the scouts saw, all that stuff. And I'm going to trust them that they believe this unit is fully capable of doing that. The 2 starters, obviously, but also the backups, like you mentioned. I believe they're fully capable, and I believe the sky's the limit with this group. I really think they still have, potential to get better. I think Okereke can even get better. I think Leonard can even get better when he comes back from that injury. So all that to say, I feel like the linebacker position, nobody really talks about it, like I mentioned, because they talk about every other position because it just hadn't been addressed. But I think it's quietly one of the better units in the league from top to bottom. But let us know, guys, what your thoughts are.
I would say this. If EJ Speed were given the opportunity to start in another unit, obviously this Colts linebacker unit, it's, in my opinion, a top 5 linebacker unit in the NFL right now. If you put him on a different unit, on a below average unit for the rest of the NFL, you gave EJ Speed a chance to start, guaranteed he becomes a starter on one of the bottom tier teams in the NFL. It's not even, I would put money on it and put easy money on it. EJ Speed is that good that he could dominate on most other linebacker rooms in the NFL. And I honestly think at some point, that's why EJ Speed, I think, is at one point going to probably end up going to another team to really compete for another spot, because I don't think he's going to get to be good enough to be Darius Leonard or Bobby Okereke. But I think at some point he's going to want to make a name for himself, because I think he's showing in the limited times he gets there, almost every time he's out on the field, he's making tackles. I mean, this guy is fast. He's long. He's just not your prototypical linebacker. And I think he has so much talent. We just don't get to see it because of how much talent is already on this unit. So I think at some point, EJ Speed's probably going to want to go somewhere to be a linebacker somewhere else. And I think there's a lot of teams that he could start for realistically right now.
Selfishly, I hope not. I hope he doesn't.
Yeah,
but,
right. Right.
Could it be kind of like a George Odom situation where he feels like, hey, I have put in my time, I've played well and I've been given the opportunity. Now I want an opportunity elsewhere. And the Colts respect that, We'll see. We'll see what happens. But as it stands right now, guys, those are our 3 positions that we feel like are underrated or underappreciated. Let us know, guys, your thoughts on these 3 units? And do you agree with us? Do you disagree with us? Is there another unit potentially that you would put on this list? Let us know all those things in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Hope you guys have a great rest of your week. And as always, guys, go Colts.